Okay, so we're recording now. I know some students said that they couldn't make it this evening, so we want to record the session. That way they can go in and look at the session. Also, it will be recorded and available on YouTube. If there's a particular part that you want to go in and look at again at a later time, you're always able to do that. Also, let me see. Can everybody see my screen now? Maybe if you can't see my screen for some reason, just let me know. Either tell me in the chat box or let me know verbally. Okay, good. It looks like some folks can see it. Okay. So here's my screen. This is my Blackboard shell. I'm in it. Yay. If you go over to, let's see, where is it? Supplemental Materials tab. And this is another thing that I typically like to tell students earlier rather than later. I have a few documents I've put in here. Some of them may not look familiar to you because they're from when I've taught the full class myself and not just in the stats lab, but they're really interesting if you want to click on them. And we're getting a little bit of feedback from somebody, so if everybody could double check and make sure their mute's on, that would be helpful. But this SPSS resources folder is a really good folder for some information on how to use SPSS. The UCLA page is really helpful. This YouTube channel right here has a bunch of screenshots and actual videos of the authors going through different exercises and activities. So you can click on that and it takes you to this YouTube, Dr. Knapp, I think is the person's name, to all these different tutorials. So depending on what analysis you're trying to do with SPSS, you can come over here to a tutorial and watch it and click on it and watch it. How to set it up, how to do things, just all the way from things like descriptive statistics, all the way up to some more complicated measures here, correlation and regression, chi-square, those sorts of things. So that's really helpful. Check that out. Some other links here. All right, somebody's unmuted. Please take a moment to make sure you're muted. All right, we have one question. Someone was asking about the appropriate version of SPSS. That's a good question. In one of these documents here, it should have told you guys where to go to get the student version of SPSS. And it may be this document here. I'm still relatively new to using a Mac, so you'll have to forgive my awkwardness. It's not here. Does anybody have that information handy where they've gone to download the student file?
Is it in the PhD orientation?
It may be. Let's check here in the syllabus.
I think I found it in week 1.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So let's see here. And again, I haven't looked in all the different Blackboard shells yet because I'm really pinch hitting. So please forgive my lack of having answers immediately, but we'll get through it. So let's see. The grad pack. Okay. Did anybody click on this? Let's see where it takes us. Okay, it's wanting us to be extra secure. Okay, is this what everybody did? The grad pack here, the $95 grad pack?
That's what I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I did. I got the one for Mac.
Okay, good.
I didn't get that kind. I got the one. I just bought the actual software. I didn't get a grad pack. I bought the actual disk.
Okay, so there's probably a couple of different formats that you could get the software in. One might be an actual disk that you load onto your computer and it installs the software from the disk, or you can go through, it's on the hub. Here's the name of this entity, and they'll let you download it right to your desktop. So this up here tells you what the most recent version is. It's the Grad Pack 20 for Windows. It's a 12-month rental. You're out of pocket $100, but you will be using it. So, chalk it up to one of those kind of like a textbook fee type thing. And so it will expire in 12 months. So you might want to renew it if you know you're going to need it, if you're going to use it for your dissertation, things like that. I'll give you my kind of soapbox speech about SPSS. I love this software. I'm a huge fan of it for social science research, and I've used it pretty extensively, both in an academic setting, also in an applied setting. I am an academician, but I've also worked for a research and evaluation arm of my state's legislature. Didn't work for any one particular political party or member or committee, but what we did was if somebody needed information on something, on an issue, and they were trying to make a policy decision, they would come to our office because they wanted good research done and they wanted it to be impartial, hopefully. And so we would go in and we would be able to provide them with some information. We used SPSS extensively to answer some really important research questions. And it's become so user-friendly now that even if you're on that end of the spectrum where you've never even opened it, you downloaded it, but you're terrified of it and you haven't even opened it yet, it's so user-friendly that it's very easy to learn. And it's just so powerful when you learn how to use it and you're able to answer your research questions with it. It's so powerful. So if you're already, Jen is saying the most recent version is 22. Okay, they keep coming out with different versions like clockwork. So I don't know what they're on now. I had one laptop that was still running 14 on it, if you believe that, from way back in the day. But so the newest version is 22, and that's something to keep in mind. Depending on what version you're using, they all integrate really well. But there are some things the instructions in our textbook, the Sweet and Grace Martin textbook, the instructions in that, some of them might not match up exactly to this newest version of SPSS. So keep that in mind as well. And that actually might be a suggestion that we might bring forth to Indiana Tech, is to see if there's a more current edition of this data analysis text that is trying to keep up with the most recent versions of SPSS. So if you find something funny or you're looking for a menu for an option and you don't quite see it, that could be what's happening. Okay, so I love SPSS. It's a fantastic tool. It's incredibly user-friendly. It may be a little bit overwhelming at first when you're trying to learn how to use it, but just to do the basic stuff, it's really good. And some students have used even Excel to do some basic data analysis in it, but what SPSS can do is just far more sophisticated and far more advanced. Now, that being said, it's not necessarily appropriate for every type of research question. There are some things that you can't do in SPSS. For example, if you need to weight your sample a particular way, and this isn't anything you need to worry about right now, but thinking down the road, if you need to weight your sample a particular way, the version of SPSS that you have might not have this ability to do it. So there's other software programs out there like Stata and, all kinds of other programs that you can use to get to what you want to do. But SPSS is just incredibly user-friendly and very powerful. And for the most part, it will do what you want it to do unless you're doing something really complicated. For a portion of my dissertation, I did have to use Stata because SPSS couldn't do what I needed it to do. But for everything you guys have to do this semester, SPSS is going to be your go-to. Okay. Mandy was saying that she had to go directly to IBM and get the version 22. Okay. If one of you guys who had to go to another link or purchased a more recent version, if you wouldn't mind just emailing me what you found, that way for next session, I can go in and update that document. That way students aren't really, hunting and pecking to find things next semester. That would be really helpful. Okay, so on the docket, on the agenda for tonight is we are going to go through some practice exercises with SPSS. If you have any particular questions, you can let me know. We are crunching a lot of information into the session tonight, so I'm not necessarily going to go through everything that is on your practice session, but we're going to try to hit a lot of the points that are going to be most helpful to you. Okay. Any other questions in general? Okay. Seeing no questions. Let's go ahead and pull our document. Which, if I'm learning Mac right, it should still be up here, right? It is indeed. Here we go. All right, so if you're following along at home in your book, these are the exercises that we're going to be going through tonight. And Jen was asking if you have to turn in the practice exercises. No, you do not have to turn in any of this practice stuff. It's just some examples that are similar to the ones that you're going to do in your homework. So it'll kind of help get you started. So you do not have to turn them in. You don't even necessarily have to do them, or some of you may have already done them. It's one of those things that's completely up to you to decide as far as your time management and your level of comfort with this stuff goes. And if you have any questions on it. And I think there's actually one of these practice exercises is an actual homework question. By accident, it got snuck in there. So I'm going to try to avoid that one. But if we do it, then it's just consider it a freebie for you. Okay. So there's a couple different ways you can get to SPSS depending on what type of computer you're using. Again, for me, I'm now learning this Mac deal, and I'm kind of regretting switching over because there's more of a learning curve than what I was comfortable with. But here we are with my brand new MacBook, and I have to learn how to do all this stuff when I'm coming from Windows. But you can just find it on your desktop and you can open it up. And depending on the speed of your processor and some other things, it might open really quickly or it might take a little while. Hopefully mine's just taking a little while. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is what your screen's gonna look like when you open it up. And it's going to give you some options here. And as you can see, it looks really familiar to what everybody who uses a computer is used to seeing. You have all these nice windows and radio boxes and different icons and things. When I first started using it, it didn't look anything like this. It was all syntax driven. You had to know how to write code in order to use this. And so it was very challenging for me, especially because at the time my chair wanted me to learn how to write syntax because that was all he did. And so he felt like it was really useful, kind of that old school mentality of I had to do it, so you had to do it. So I learned how to write a lot in syntax. If that's something you're interested in, learning how to write syntax and using syntax with SPSS, I would really recommend that too, because that's one difficulty with the point and click menu driven options is that it's kind of cumbersome and it takes a little bit longer. And if you know how to write the code to tell SPSS exactly what you want it to do, it goes much faster. So you can open your data from wherever it might be here. You should have gotten a disk with your textbook. This is also something I typically like to send out at the very beginning of the semester because there's a lot of used textbooks out there. And before students have bought a used textbook and they've gone to get the disk out and then they realize there's no disk. So if for some reason you're one of the unlucky who's gotten a used textbook and your disk is missing, you need to let me know right away, because unless you've gotten the files from a classmate, you're not going to have the files to be able to do the work. The same thing goes for checking and making sure all of your pages are in the textbook. So look at what your homework assignment is and go to the corresponding page. You know, if you have to do chapter 7, problem 2, flip through your textbook and make sure that actual physical page is in your textbook, because you'll notice in your textbook the pages are perforated. So students can rip them out, and if you're in a face-to-face class, you know, they may hand them in, or sometimes, as in this online environment, students will write it out on their page and then scan it and send it in. So make sure you have everything that you need to do the assignments, and if you don't, for some reason, we'll try to help you out. So what we're going to do is we are going to just choose one of these. We're not going to do that. Okay, we're going to hit cancel, and we're just going to take a look at this blank screen here. So it looks very similar to an Excel file where you have columns and you have rows. And then you have these menu options up here in the bar up top that are how you're going to tell SPSS to do the things that you want it to do. And this book does a really good job of showing you step by step how to get through the menus. Again, keep in mind there may be a few slight discrepancies in there depending on if SPSS has changed their version since this last edition of the text was written. But there's a lot more ways than just one to get SPSS to do what you want it to do, which is one of the nice things. So if you're somebody who's been using SPSS forever and you know how to get done what you want to do, and it's not the way that I do it, or it's not the way that the book tells you to do it, that's fine. As long as we come to the same conclusion or get the same answer, that's absolutely fine. Right now, we're looking at it in data view. So if we had a data set open, all of these cells would be filled in with data points. If we click over here on the bottom to variable view, this is where it's getting a little more complicated than the simple Excel spreadsheet, but this is where it's going to tell us a little bit more about our variables. And why this is important is because you can only do certain types of analyses with certain types of variables. For example, a very simple example is that you can't have an average of male or female. If you collect gender from people and give them two options and say, check if you're male or female, and people check the answer, you cannot compute a mean of that. You could compute a proportion. You could say I have 50% men, 50% women, but you couldn't compute an average or a mean for that. So there's only certain things that you can do with different levels of variables. And you need to know that. This is why we put so much emphasis on learning research on the front end about how we're going to conceptualize and operationalize our variables and how we're going to ask questions. Because all this is really important. It's even more important almost than when we get to this data analysis part. And this is where students get stuck thinking that this is the most complicated and the most important component, is when we crunch all the numbers, when really it's all of the time and the effort and the literature review and making sure that we have well-specified hypotheses, and that our analysis plan is well put together, and that our measures are well operationalized, et cetera, et cetera. It all is very important, because no matter how sophisticated this SPSS program is, if you put garbage in to it, you're going to get garbage out. It's like I use the example of, when my son, when he was little, he loved to play with a calculator. He'd get a calculator out and he'd just type a bunch of numbers into it. Type 15 numbers and hit the divide, and then hit 15 numbers and hit the equal sign, and it would spit something out. And it might look funny in scientific notation, but it was a something. It did the calculation. It did what you told it to do. So the same thing goes here with SPSS. If you just put a bunch of junk in and then you run some crazy analysis, it's just going to be a bunch of junk out on the other side. So it's still not as sophisticated as the human brain. You still have to know what you're doing with the different variables and what you're telling SPSS to do. Because if you tell it to do some of these higher level orders of computation, but you haven't done due diligence in ensuring that it's an appropriate treatment to do with those variables, then you're going to be in trouble. And then maybe you go publish your research, or you try to do your dissertation, and somebody questions you on it because it hasn't been well conceptualized. So here we are, still with our blank slate, our clean slate here. We don't have any data into our window, and there's a couple of different ways you can pull the data in. You can use these menus, and let's see here. You're going to have to give me a minute because I'm in Mac mode. I'm just going to go back to where my downloads are. And, I put them in a folder over here. Okay, so I'm going to get them out of my folder that I have saved over here. We'll put them right to the desktop so we don't have to go searching. Okay, but however you open yours and get to your files, that's fine too. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and start with our first example. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Oh, James was asking if we would be recording. Yes, we'll be recording, and I will try to get it converted to YouTube as soon as I can. I'll actually take some time to do that after we end the session tonight. So I'll get it converted to YouTube. It does take a little while for it to do that, like a couple hours, depending on how long we go tonight. And then I'll send out the link via Blackboard. So it'll be pretty soon. Okay, Mark has a question. What's your question, Mark? Mark was wondering by where the files are. Yes, the files, those two files are on the disk provided in the text. So if you don't have the disk, then let me know and I can email you the files. Fortunately, they're small enough that we can email them. Although I'm not sure if that's permitted under copyright laws, but as long as nobody turns us into the copyright police, I think we'll be okay. If it's not in your book because you bought a used book, it's not really fair. All right, we're going to go into chapter 2, question 2, starting at the beginning, which is on page 39 of your book if you're following along. So what it's asking us to do is to open our states 10 data set. And that is one of those files that's going to be located on your disk, and I just moved it over here to my desktop, so I'm going to go ahead and open it. And you can see down here on the bottom, it's getting the file. All right, and there we go. Okay, so now you can see our blank screen is now populated with our data. Something else that's important to point out, SPSS has several different screens that will all be running at one time. So you'll have your data editor screen, which is this screen right here that we're looking at. You're also going to have this syntax file. Okay, and this syntax file, I'm sorry, this is actually an output file, but this is going to tell you what you've told SPSS to do with our menus that we've been running. And it's also going to give us any errors here. So if you're getting errors, you want to read them and try to make heads or tails of what they say. And I guess this is telling me it's mad at me maybe for moving my icons out of that folder. It doesn't look like it's going to have any effect or impact on our analysis, so we can just close that and not be annoyed with that. So we're going to come back over here to our data editor. And as you can see, we have our rows going this way, and our rows are analogous to cases. So each one of these rows in our file here is a unit of analysis. So for this data set, our unit of analysis is a state. That's an important distinction to make. We always want to know what our unit of analysis is. Is it a person? Is it a county? Is it a state? Is it a classroom? Etc. We need to have that defined. That way we know what we can do and can't do with these variables. And then up here across the top, it's giving us all of our variables. Okay, so this one's the state. It's assigned a state ID. And then you'll see what typically happens with most data files is SPSS limits what you can write up here as a variable name. So we really have no idea what DMS 395 means unless we get a code book from somewhere. Another way that we can tell is if you click over here in variable view, you'll notice our screen kind of flip-flopped. So our variables are now running down this way. But this is telling us a little bit more about each of these variables. It's giving us some very specific information about these types of variables. And this label column over here is pretty helpful. If you have some kind of code word for what your variable name is, hopefully you're going to get a data set that's going to have labels in it already. And this here is telling us what this acronym or abbreviation stands for. So that kind of makes a little bit more sense about what this variable is. And it also tells us if it's numeric or string, the values, what it wants you to do with missing labels, the level of measure, and those sorts of things. So that's really important. We want to make sure that we have a good understanding of our data set in our variable view. Okay, so we have 51 cases here in our state. So that's a relatively small number of cases. When you think about the fact that if you're doing large secondary data analysis of a large project, like I spend a lot of my time doing, you could be looking at, 300, 400, 500,000 records as opposed to 51. And these number of variables can stretch out for however long you want them to as well, for whatever, as many as you need to collect. So your variables times your cases can be a very large number of data points that you want to do analysis on. And that's the beauty of SPSS, is it does all of that for us. And it takes care of all of the math and all of the formulas and all of the analysis that we need to do, we can basically do by learning how to point and click. But we have to know what we're doing, because if we just point and click anything and we're not, doing it in the right way, then we're not going to get the right answers to our questions, which can be particularly problematic. Not so much because we get points off on our homework, but if we're using this information to make important decisions, we want to make sure we're doing it correctly. All right. Another thing is, if we have a really small data set, so you're going to come up with your own data sets in a couple of your examples here, and you might have like 5 or 10 cases. It's really easy to eyeball information. It might be really easy to eyeball, even in a set of 50 here, what the highest number is. If we're interested in the highest value here of our first, we could pretty easily eyeball 51 records. And my guess would be down here, Utah 20.8 would be the highest of whatever this value is. So it's really easy to do with 51 cases. But if you're talking about several 100,000, it's not going to be easy to do. So that's why we need to know how to run these analyses. Okay. So what question 2 here in chapter 2 is asking us to do is it's asking us to go over to this variable view. And it's asking us, in our opinion, to look at some variables that might measure these following concepts. All right. And then it's telling us here that the variable names begin with a 2-letter code for the general topic of that variable. All right. So if we want to look for economic prosperity, we would look down here for economic prosperity. Okay. And that's telling us a little bit about what these variables might have to do with. Okay. So you would take some examples and fill those out. The variable name here would be ECS 96, which is actually per capita gross domestic product for 2008. So that gives us a little bit more information about what that variable is actually capturing or is actually measuring. The same thing with substance abuse. Where did our substance abuse go? Well, did I open the wrong data set? Well, since I don't have a code book, I could still look at my labels here to try to find something that might have to do with substance abuse. The same thing with our educational attainment. I can look through and easily eyeball, fortunately, since I have such a small data set, here I can clearly see which ones might have to do with educational attainment. Any questions about how to navigate around the variable labels, the variable names? Okay, let's move on here then to Chapter 2, Question 4, which is on page 42 of your book. Now it's asking us to open a different data set. So you can do a few different things. You can, in these more recent versions of SPSS, you can have more than one data set open at a time, which is nice. Previously, SPSS wouldn't let you do that. You could only have one data set open at a time. So it's nice if you need to merge and do some different things in multiple data sets, but it can get really confusing. And when you're running your different analyses, you need to make sure you're running the analyses in the proper data set that you want to have open. So if you feel like you want to limit confusion and complication and you just want to close out of one data set when you're no longer working in it and reopen it back up, that's fine. If not, you can minimize it and you can open the other one. It will let you do that. Okay, you can see up here in this top bar, it's telling us what data set we're working in. So we're now in the GSSO8 data set as opposed to the other one that we were working in before, the states 10. Okay. And here's the tricky thing. You could want to be doing analysis in states 10 and have accidentally clicked on this one and then gone to your file, analyze whatever and started trying to run analysis. And then when you get your results, you can't find your variables. Well, it was because you were not in the correct data set. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. We can go back over here to our output file. And it's still giving us the same error, but I think it's just because it's mad at me for moving the file out of that folder. So I'm just going to disregard that and not worry about it. Okay, so we're going to look over here in data view, and we see here that we've got, it looks like our unit of analysis is some type of individual. Okay, so that each of these rows contain information about a person, telling us things like their marital status, their age, their education, their gender, their race, and lots of other stuff. Whatever this survey or this has measured. Okay, this data set is quite a bit bigger than our other ones, so it's really not easy to eyeball. So we've really got to find out how to do some analysis in SPSS to make this useful. We can go over to variable view, take a look at what types of things this data set has captured. Okay. As you can see in this data set, we now have some values in these two columns, our values column and our missing column, and we're going to go over an example of what those are and what to do with those in just a minute. So those are all coded by your analyst. Your analyst or your researcher is going in and is telling SPSS what values to use for different labels, what values to use for missing. So these are important because when you try to do different types of analyses, you have to have your labels coded appropriately or the analysis isn't going to work. So it wants us to examine this particular variable, the satisfaction with financial situation, which is SATFIN. So we can look over here and we can just found that by eyeball. You can go in and have these variables organized however you want. If you want them alphabetically, if you want them by order that you've created them. I'm saying that now, and I'm not sure how to do that in my Mac. Oh, you can sort them. Okay, so there's different ways to do that so you're not hunting and pecking around. But it's telling us that we want to look at this satisfaction with financial situation. We're going to identify the values and the value labels. So this has been a question that a researcher wants to know. How satisfied are you with your financial situation? So they've given a number, okay? The respondent has answered this question with a number and has been told that a number corresponds to these different values, okay? So the researchers then gone in and told SPSS, because SPSS can't run numeric analysis on not at all, satisfied, etc. It needs a number associated with it to do any type of higher level modeling with this particular variable. So that's why the researcher has gone in and created these labels. Okay, so 0 is inapplicable, 1 is satisfied, 2 more or less, 3 not at all, 8 don't know, 9 not applicable. This is another reason why we need a code book. No answer, there we go. NA is no answer, IAP is inapplicable. So those could be different things. And that's why we need to operationalize each of those as the researcher. You need to know what's the difference for your study between inapplicable, don't know, and no answer. Okay. Is there a difference between don't know and no answer? I'm not sure. I don't have the answer to that question because I don't know why they designed this data set and what questions they were trying to answer. This is one of those very subjective elements of designing a data set, is that you have to design it in a way that's appropriate to be answering your research question. So for whatever reason, there's a very distinct difference in this data between those three answers, response choices. We can eyeball and see that, yes, there's a difference between satisfied more or less and not at all, but the other one's still kind of subjective. All right, any questions on that? All right, let's move on to chapter 2, number 5, still on page 42. And this one is still asking us to work in the GS-SO8 data set. And it wants us to look at distribution of income in the United States. So we're looking at in our data view again. Okay, so we're going to click over here on the bottom to data view. And we're going to find our variable that talks about income. Okay. This particular researcher is eyeballing, and she sees that the values range from 1 to 25. Okay. But occasionally she's seeing these oddball numbers, 98, 98, 98, etc. She's kind of confused because she says, well, nobody has an income of 7 or 23 or 98. So what must be going on? Well, the data are fine. There's really nothing wrong with the data. They're just labeled in a particular way. So if we click back over here to our variable view, I want to put these in alphabetical order. What was the name of our income 06? Here we go. Okay. Our labels, our value labels will tell us that this particular interval, this variable has been coded in intervals in an interval way. So we can see here that somebody who's responded a 10 has an income in this range and on up. Okay. Any more questions about value labels? Okay, let's move on then to chapter 3, question 1, page 69 of your book. Still asking us to work in the GSSO8. Now we're going to start to do some of the analysis, to get into doing the analysis of these variables and getting some answers to some questions or looking at distributions of these variables. And this is asking us to make a prediction. This might be the one that's an actual homework question or not. I can't remember, but we'll go ahead and do it anyway. So it's asking us what percent of Americans are saying their marriages are very happy, somewhat happy, or not too happy. So as researchers, we're in the business of making these hypotheses. And as you've probably been learning about this session in the class about how to make a good hypothesis is, and what a hypothesis is, and that it's more than just an educated guess, which is kind of a really simplified and somewhat incorrect explanation of what a hypothesis is. But that's what we do. We make these hypotheses. So the book's asking you to do that. It's asking you to make a prediction, make a hypothesis, and then use our data here to get an answer about what's been going on in this particular data set. And it's also telling us to make a pie chart, which is really easy to do with SPSS, fortunately. So if you go into chapter 3, if you read the pages, the preceding pages in chapter 3, it tells you step by step on how to do all of these things. So again, I'm going to add the caveat that if your book says to do it a little bit differently than the way that I do it, that's absolutely fine. If you know how to write syntax and want to run your syntax, that's fine too. If you know a point and click way that works better for you, that's absolutely fine too. There's more than one way up the mountain here. That's the thing to keep in mind. So what we're going to do is we want to look at a frequency, here we go with my Mac. We want to look at a frequency distribution of happiness of this variable. And it is HAPMR. All right. And over here in your list of variables, you can also have this organized any way that you want. It's been alphabetized for us here. But if you're creating a lot of new variables and you want the new variables at the end of your list, so you don't have to look through an alphabetized list, that would be a reason to not alphabetize them, but to do them in chronological order. So we're just going to move that over. Okay. You can look at some of these other options here. If you want any of these, mean, median, mode, but we have to know what kind of variable we're working with, and it doesn't look like we're working with a variable here that would be able to run some of those. Now, even if we checked them, SPSS might give us some information, but that doesn't mean that it's relevant to anything. Okay. Over here, you can tell it to give you a pie chart if you want frequencies or percentages. And this book's asking us for percentages, so we can click percentages. There's a couple different ways you can go in and make charts in here as well. However you want to do it's absolutely fine. If you want to take a look at what format's asking you to do and click around in there. Now, the easiest thing to do is you can just click OK, and SPSS is going to do what you've told it to do. But if I were you and I was interested in learning how to write syntax, or just even not if you're not interested in learning to write syntax, just to keep yourself well organized, I really suggest that you do this, is you use this button over here, and this paste button, and you're going to click paste, and it's opening up this new window that's different from your output and different from your data. It is your syntax editor. And this right here is what we just told SPSS through our menu, through our point and click. This is what we want it to do. Okay. And when you paste it in here, it means that you're leaving yourself an audit trail if you want to go back at some point and run the same analysis again. Say you add variables or you add cases to your file and you want to run the same analysis. Well, if you have your syntax file saved, then you don't have to go back and do all those point and click menus again. You just select the parts that you want from your syntax file here and you run it. So we'll just go ahead and highlight, and then you're going to click the play button, I like to call it, or run. Okay. And now SPSS is flashing us back over here to this output, and it's actually giving us our answers to our question here. All right. So it's telling us that we have a total of 969 valid responses. We've got a lot of missing cases in there for some reason. It looks like it's coding all of these inapplicable, don't know, etc. as missing, even though we could probably maybe make a guess that the reason why they're not applicable is because maybe these people aren't married. These people in our sample aren't married. So this is why it's up to us as a researcher to know what these data mean and what they're capturing. But we can see here, of the 969 people who reported the happiness of their marriage, 29.5%, or 596 of them, said that they were very happy. Okay. 343, or 17%, said that they were pretty happy. Now, I wonder what the difference between very happy and pretty happy is. But again, that was up to the researcher to have operationalized, hopefully, and defined those terms to their samples so they knew how to choose one or the other. That way they're capturing good data. And 30 people said not too happy. So if this were my data set that I was trying to do some analysis on, I would want to know a lot more about the definitions of those response choices, because that could influence you to answer one way or another if you knew which one meant what the definition of each of them was. Okay. So then the book's asking us to do a little analysis, some discussion, some conclusions regarding our findings. How close were your predictions to what the data said? And keep in mind, your data is always sample dependent. So just because 29.5% of this sample said they were very happy in their marriages, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can generalize to all of married people and say that 29.5% of all married people are very happy. Your data are sample dependent. Now, if this is a representative sample, then maybe we can make some generalizations, but we have to be very careful in making that leap from our data set. All right, any questions about frequencies? Okay, so the next question is asking us to construct and print a bar chart. We're on page 70, chapter 3, question 2, of Ever Stray, which is how common marital infidelity was in this survey. And it's telling you to give an appropriate title to your graph and refine your graph so that it's clearly printed and aesthetically appealing. So we were able to do this pie chart here really easily with one of the options that was embedded in that function. But you need to, in order to make a fancier chart, you need to use your graphs function. Okay, either the chart builder or the one I usually use are these legacy dialogues, just because that's how I know what to do. But the book goes through step by step and does tell you how to build your charts. So I won't spend a lot of time doing that. But you're going to want to construct and print your bar chart about your variable for Ever Stray. So one way we would go about doing that is we would just simply tell SPSS to make us a bar chart. Okay, and then you can go through and point and click. End of cases. What does it want us to do? How common? And you can see here there's different options for your titles. And this is in the legacy builder, again, which is the one that I know how to do. But these chart builders are much more interactive. And it's giving us a warning here. Before we use this dialog, the measurement levels should be set properly for each variable in your chart. So what it's telling you is before you start to build a chart, you need to go back over here to your data set and make sure that your levels are set appropriately, because different charts can only be used for certain types of data. All right, any questions about how to build charts? Again, that's very clearly specified in the text, so I want to get to some of the homework 5 examples because those are a little more complicated. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that unless somebody has a specific question. Oh yeah, Jen was saying the difference between the marriage question, you're looking at the valid percent versus the total percent. Right. So it all depends on what question you're trying to answer. Have you been told to exclude missing data, or for some reason do you want to include these people? It really depends on the question. And I agree with you, Jen. For me, if I was reporting this information, I would say that the people who aren't married really shouldn't be factored into the equation. So I would want to look at the valid percent over here as opposed to the to including those people. But it's very subjective. It's going to really depend on your question and whether or not you want to include missing information in your data. Because missing information can be really important. You need to find out why your data are missing. For example, if there wasn't a clear explanation, as in this example, oh, these people probably aren't married, if this data was just missing, we would really want to go in and find out why. Did we ask a question that nobody could understand? So they just skipped over it. So it's not that they didn't purposefully provide information or say, I don't know. Is there something systematic? I don't know if this class goes over systematic or system missing versus random missingness, but you have to be really careful when you're looking at your missing data because you want to find out why they're missing and if that information needs to be included in your report or not. So good point. All right. So chapter 3, question 4 is on page 72 of your book. And Kimberly, I did see your comment, so we can you can address that with me privately. Guys, if you've got missing pages, make sure you take a look and let's try to get something figured out sooner rather than later with regard to that. All right, chapter 3 is moved into looking at some distributions and some univariate analysis. So we move from looking at the characteristics of one variable or univariate analysis, which you need to do for every variable that you have and that you want to work with. If this were my data set that I had gotten in and I was trying to do a research project on, I would want to go in and look at every single one of my variables of interest and look at and explore it. Look at distributions, learn the characteristics, see what's missing, see why that information might be missing. You want to go in and make sure that all of your single variables are in good shape. That's part of your data cleaning process, which oftentimes takes a really long time to do. Because before you start doing some of this higher order fancy analysis, correlations and crosstabs and regressions, things like that, you have to make sure each of your individual variables is in really good shape. Because if you have a crummy variable and you try to toss it into a regression model, then it's going to make your whole model squirrely and you're going to be like, why did that happen? And then you're going to go back and find out it's because you have this crazy skewed distribution for one of your univariate variables. So for this one here, and hang on, I'm going to need to put you guys on pause just a second. Hang on. Okay. Sorry about that. We've got a lot of feedback coming in from somebody. So everybody check your mics. We're back on track. All right. So this question here is asking us to look at the measures of central tendency for juvenile arrest rate per 100,000 in 2008. All right. So what we're going to do is you can do your analysis in either view. Okay. It doesn't matter if you're in variable view or you're in data view. But we need to find the CRC192 variable. Go back over here and we can try to find it if we want. Oh, actually, I think I'm in the wrong data set. I'm not even following my own rules. Let's get that out of there. Nope. Did I close it? Or am I having Mac problems? There we go. Okay. So we're now looking at CRC192, which is this variable down here. Reported juvenile arrest rate per 100,000, 2008. So it doesn't matter what we have highlighted here because that's not what's telling SPSS to do what we want it to do. We have to come up here and look at our measures of central tendency. And we're going to select it. And we're going to look at our options. Okay. And again, there are several different ways to do this. It's telling us minimum, maximum, mean. I don't know if we can get what we want through there. We might want to go through. Is this what I just did? Sorry, guys. No. This may not give us all the options we want. This one. All right, this one will give us many of what we want. May not be all of what we want. And we can paste that in. Now you'll notice when we've pasted this in that it's going to give us this syntax file, and up here it's telling us which data set is active. So that's important to look at because when you're working in multiple data sets, you want to make sure that you have the one that you're interested in looking at active. And you don't want to just grab it and run it without making sure that the correct one is open. All right, so this is giving us some of our information to fill out. It's actually not giving all of us. Oh, but up there it's telling us to use the explore command. So that may be the way that you'd want to go to get all of that particular information that the text is asking you to give. But this was what I meant about there's more than one way to find the information. There's more than one path to go down to get the information. It just depends on exactly what particular numbers that you need to find and what type of display that you want. So here it's asking you to do a little bit of analysis, not just to report the numbers that you're given, but it's asking you to circle the measure that you would use for central tendency or the one that you would report. And this is going to be different based on your data set. If you have really skewed data or if you have a lot of outliers, that's information that you can tell by eyeballing some of your measures of central tendency. Or if you want to run some charts and graphs, you can look at a scatter plot, things like that to look for outliers. And those will tell you whether or not it would be appropriate to use an average, because an average is one of those numbers that's very heavily skewed by outliers. So if you have a lot of outliers in your data, number one, you want to find out why you've got them and what you're going to do with them. You can't just toss them out because it's skewing your results. You have to figure out what's going on with those. Was it an accident that they accidentally add a zero to their income and that's why they're an outlier? Or is it something that should actually be there? So those measures are going to be dependent upon what these data are telling you. Okay, what do these data tell you about what is going on with the distribution? So that's the analysis part. You're going to report the numbers as you see them, and then you're also going to give us some discussion of your findings. All right, I'm not going to do chapter 3, number 5, because it's very similar. So we can cruise on into chapter 4. Okay. So we're now moving from looking at univariate analysis of the variables, so looking at the properties or the characteristics or the distribution of one variable, to creating new variables. We can take any variable that we have in our data set and we can use it to create a new variable. And this is really helpful to start answering a lot of questions that you come up with as you're working through your data set, as you're working through your research project. So it's telling us here to use our states data set again. So we're going to want to go and make sure that we've got that one open. I've got version control issues going on. Here we go. Okay, and in the states data, it's telling us that it wants us to create a brand new variable. So what it wants us to do, for some reason, for whatever reason, our research question cannot be answered with the data as is in this data set. We need to come up with a new variable to add to this data set in order to help us answer some questions. So what we want to do is we want to know murders as a percentage of violent crimes. So we might have information on murders and we might have some information on violent crimes, but maybe we don't have it in the particular format that we need to be able to answer this question. So we can tell SPSS to create a new variable to do that. So again, there's a couple of different ways to get into this. We're going to compute a new variable, and then we can either type in or we can point and click, but the book on page 93 is telling us here what variables it wants to use to compute. So CRS37, we can either click on it or if we want, we can just type it in. We're going to divide it by CRS33, and we want it to be a percentage of, okay? So we're going to need to make sure we have our math formula done correctly. And you can, again, you can use these buttons or you can type whatever you're comfortable with. Okay. And our target variable is going to be murder as a percentage. The textbook's telling us that. Okay. There's some ways that we can do if-then options, but we're going to just include all cases here. If for some reason we wanted to exclude a particular state or two, we could do that. But we're just going to do this just straight up here. Again, you can either just click OK and have it run it, or you can paste it into your syntax so you have an audit trail. And run it from there. You can see over here, it's running it for us. And voila. Okay, we don't have any fancy numbers or charts in our data set because all it did was create us a new variable. It didn't do any analysis on the variable, it just created it. Oh my gosh, I am having major version control issues with this Mac. Where did it go? Here we go. Okay. All right, so we should be able to go over to our variable view. Oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. Variable view. And if we scroll down here to the end, we can see our new variable has been created. Okay, and then we can go over here and type in this label that it's telling us to type in. Okay, we could do that back in that menu-driven box as well, or you can do it here. Either way, it's fine. And then it's telling us it wants us to do a little bit of analysis on this. It wants some descriptive statistics. So we're going to go up to our descriptives, and now we're in alphabetical order. So we should see our new variable there. We can tell it what we want to see, and we'll just click OK. And it'll give us some information. It didn't give us all the information that we wanted, but all right. Any questions on that, creating a new variable? All right, I think I'm just gonna pick out a couple more that I think will be useful. I'm not gonna necessarily go in order. Does anyone have a particular example in mind that they wanted to ask questions about or see tonight? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and do for our final one here tonight then, I'm going to go ahead and do chapter 5, question 4. Okay, and this is an example of moving from univariate analysis to bivariate analysis. So now that we've done all this cleaning and looking at our different variables individually, we can, and we're confident and comfortable that everything looks good and that there's not anything funny or fishy going on with lots of outliers or lots of missing values and skewed data, then we can move to feeling comfortable and confident enough to doing some bivariate analysis or some inference or even multivariate. I don't think we'd really go into very much multivariate analysis this semester. Looking at some regression models and things like that. But for bivariate analysis, it's asking us to look at the GSSO8 data, and it wants to look at the relationship between race and whether a person supports the death penalty. Okay, so maybe we have some predictions about that. Hopefully they're based in the literature, because when we come up with hypotheses, we don't necessarily just want to make a guess or even an educated guess. We want those hypotheses to be rooted in the literature and theory driven. Hopefully in the class you guys have learned about theory and theoretically driven research versus atheoretical research. And while there is sort of this constellation of your own practice wisdom and the best available evidence that drives your hypotheses, it really does need to be rooted in the research or in the evidence somewhere, because if you just start plucking hypotheses out of the air or using your opinion, it really can be a waste of time. So they need to be rooted. All right, let's get rid of states 10 since we're not going to need it anymore. It's going to ask us if we want to keep it, and we're going to tell it no. All right, and it's going to open back up our GSSO8. So we're going to make a prediction between race and whether or not a person supports the death penalty, because maybe we found a lot of studies that have said that we should expect something one way or another, or maybe we found that there's this huge gap in the literature regarding this particular topic, so we want to investigate it further. So we're going to go ahead and make our predictions. So then we're going to go in SPSS and we're going to find out what these data are telling us about a person's race and whether or not they support the death penalty. And it is sample dependent. This is what our findings are for this data set. It doesn't necessarily represent another data set. So in order to do that, we're going to use our crosstabs function. And this is really handy and quite frequently used in social science research. And we want to look for race and capital punishment. And really, what you put in your rows and your columns is dependent upon the setup of the data, or how you want it to appear, or how much space you have. If you're printing, a lot of times it's a logistical issue. This isn't really a mathematical issue. So what I like to do is I like to put the columns, I'd like to have less columns than I do rows, because when you print columns, they'll print out way out to the left and the right forever and go on and on and on and on for multiple pages. So if you have more information, you want it to go down the page on the rows as opposed to out on the right side of the page in the column. That's just kind of my handy dandy tip, but it really, for this particular instance, it doesn't matter. So let's find our capital punishment variable, and we can we'll put that in the column, because we're probably going to have less response choices in that one than race. We're going to move that over there. All right. So this is also asking us for a little bit more involved information. Okay. We want to make sure that we've got percentages in here. And it's also asking us for some significance values and significance levels. So we want to make sure that we have that information turned on, because it's not necessarily going to be turned on by default. So we want to look in statistics here, make sure that our chi-square is clicked. And if we need or want any of this other stuff, we can click it and it'll give it to us. I love some of these names that are these tests that are named after the statistician or the mathematician that came up with them, and there's tons of them, and they're really cool and complicated, but some of them are really hard to pronounce, but it's kind of neat to learn what they are and what they do. Okay, so we're going to make sure that that's clicked, and then we're also going to want it to tell us percentages. Okay, and so we need to know which percentages we want. Do we want the row percentage or do we want the column percentage? Okay. And then if you know what a residual is and you want that, you might want to have that in there. If you know a little bit about what a crosstab is it's telling us the difference between the expected values and the observed values. So you might also want to know what the expected values, what the theoretical mathematical values should be. You can click that. But the more of the stuff that you click, the more jumbled your output is going to look. So if you're new to this and you're just learning how to do it, you might want to just do what it's asking you to do. And then you can continue, and you can either paste it into your syntax, because say you want to run this again and you don't want to have to go through all this point and click again, then you can do that. If not, you can just click OK. And it's going to give us our crosstabs. All right. Which is really nice, because now we know by race and by favor. Okay. And then down here is where it's giving us our significance testing, right? It's giving us our chi-square value and whether or not the finding is significant. And this is usually truncated. If you're interested in what it is, you can go in and look at it. Why is it not doing it? There you go. See, that's the actual value there. It's giving it to us in scientific notation. If you need that for some strange reason, I don't know why it totally deleted our p-value there, though. Okay. All right, any questions? You guys are a very quiet bunch. Is there anything I didn't go over tonight that you think would be helpful that you would like to go over? All right, while you guys are thinking about that, let me also just reiterate too that when you turn in these homework assignments, please turn them in as one document for each homework. So you're going to have one document upload for homework 4 and one document upload for homework 5. So that might mean you need to print out a couple of output pages, like maybe you need to print this page out off your printer and then scan it and PDF it. Send me a big PDF file with your homework assignment. So one PDF file with everything for homework 4 and one PDF file with everything for homework 5. In general, I don't mind if you need to submit an extra document because it wouldn't fit in your file or you couldn't figure out how to scan it in. That's absolutely fine. But what we're trying to avoid is having like 25 attachments in the Dropbox and I'm clicking around and trying to figure out what's what and I can't make heads or tails. So please, I just ask that you make it very clear that you're submitting what you're submitting. All right, let me go through here. It looks like we have some questions. Okay. Yes, you can. Yeah, if you're unable to scan, that's absolutely fine. You can put them into a Word document. That's what's nice about these editors. You can copy this into Word. You can copy it into Excel. You can copy it into the Paint viewer, PowerPoint, whatever you need to do. So if you can't scan, you can do that and then make your Word document look exactly like the pages in your book. So if you're answering chapter 3, question 6, just make sure I can tell that that's what it is that you're answering if you're not scanning the page from the book itself. Okay, let me see here. We have a couple more questions. I just want to make sure we get to all of them. Yes, the same thing. You can copy you don't really need to, I don't need to see your syntax. That's one thing that I don't really need to see unless you're having a problem. If you're having a problem answering a question and you're getting an error, that's an instance where I can't help you unless I can see your syntax, which is that file we were pasting in. Because if you just show me your chart and you say, here's my chart, this is what I'm getting, and I don't understand why it's the wrong answer, there's no audit trail. So I can't go back and look and say, well, what did you click on? I can't see what you clicked on to make this chart. So that's why the syntax files are so important, because then I can look step by step at what you did, and maybe you didn't check a box or you checked too many boxes. Your syntax file will tell me that.
Dr. O'Leary?
Yes.
This is Jason. Do you want us to email these documents to you as well as drop them in the Blackboard, or?
Nope, you can drop them into Blackboard. I seem to be having no problem getting into Blackboard. And that way, when you drop them into Blackboard, it links it right to the grade book. So what I do is I go in and I grade the assignment and give you your feedback. There, you'll get lots of written feedback from me on these, and it'll link your grade right in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, scrolling back up just to make sure I hit everything. Yes, absolutely. I'm available by email if you have questions that arise during the week. Also, I've frequently had phone calls with students, so if you really need to talk something through, we can even get back in. If it's just the two of us, we can get back into GoToMeeting and go through these. And I would love a way to be able to do these stats labs where a student could actually take control of the screen and do some exercises on their own, but it would be too time consuming. But yeah, so let me know what I can do. And then Jen's asking a good question. She's asking for homework 5. You're assigned a question, and it's a little bit confusing and misleading. I agree. Chapter 4, exercise 7. It's just a theoretical question. So think about it theoretically. You do not have to do exercise 6. But if you were to do exercise 6, just think through how you would do it in order to answer that question. I'm sorry if that's a little vague. This is another one of those suggestions that I would like to make about changing the class at some point. I'm not a huge fan of that question, but just thinking it through. And so you're just going to give me a little bit of a narration about how you would do it. All right. Any other questions, concerns?
When will what you recorded be able to be seen?
Hi, sure. I will try to convert it tonight. It does take a while to convert into YouTube. I think it takes at least as long as the session is because it's just a free YouTube account. You don't get any special fancy stuff along with it. And then I'll email everybody the link. So I'll just do that as soon as it's done converting.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Chad and Jason had a question about chapter 5, number 7. Let me take a look. Looking at the wrong page here. Okay, with that one, you can, if you've got tons and tons of data points that are printing out, there should be a checkbox that you can check it to not show a frequency table, and that'll give you less pages because you don't necessarily need them to do that. So make sure, like for example, if it's in this option here, if you unclick that, it'll less, but you might need that clicked on some of them. So it just really depends on what the question is that you're looking at.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? All right. Again, well, I thank you all very much. I'm sorry we didn't have any more time for back and forth during the beginning of the session to get to know each other a little bit better. But if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me and I will get this stuff graded as soon as you guys get it turned in and get that feedback back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.